Pence. What a pleasure to have you on the God Size Stories show.
You.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Oh, it's an honor to talk to you. I know you are a busy woman and you have an incredible story to share with us. And of course, I have followed you during especially the presidency of President Trump and Vice President Mike Pence and all the things that you were doing there in Washington. But I was very surprised of what a unique story you have, and I'm very excited about talking to you today about your brand new book, and I have a copy right here. When it's your turn to save, experiencing God's grace and His calling for your life. How exciting. So, is tell me a little bit about this book. I know that it's not a political book, right? It's not a memoir. So, what what made you write this book?
Well, thank you, Patricia. It's just an honor to be on your show today and to talk about the book. Really, the impetus for the book was to have an opportunity to tell about the things that we accomplished in the office of the Second Lady and when I was First Lady of Indiana. And my staff actually told me, if you don't write a book, we're going to write a book. So I wanted to tell a lot of those stories, but I also wanted to be an encouragement to the reader so that if the reader is trying to think, am I supposed to serve in this area, or is God really calling me to that area, that they would be encouraged to go ahead and serve as well, because I think God does call us to serve, and He gives us the grace to serve when He does that.
Absolutely. And, he is the one who enables us, right? I have found out that at least it's my experience that he's never called me inside my comfort zone.
That's exactly right.
Right.
I tell some stories like that in the book, that it's like when your life is comfortable and it's all settled and you think, okay, now I've figured some of this stuff out, then he puts it into a blender. And that was our experience as well.
Absolutely. It's very true. And we know that the reason he does that is because then that way his light will show forth, right? He
Right.
will enable you and then he gets the glory, not you. Well, it's always to me incredible. I find it very refreshing for me personally as a woman of faith when I find out that people in the highest positions in power, whether it's a governor or in your case, you were the first lady in Indiana and then the second lady in the United States, that these are people who are praying, who are at the office, they are seeking God, they are seeking God's face. So tell me a little bit about your experience, because I can only imagine how ruthless it is up there in the top. We see it in the news and we see all the attacks, but tell me what makes you and former Vice President Mike Pence stay grounded in your faith when all of these rough waters, are seeking to devour you.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that I wrote the book, because I wanted the reader to be encouraged and to know that we have stories all through the Bible, don't we? That even in the midst of chaos, in the midst of evil things going on in our world, we can still trust that God is on His throne and that He is in control. And what we need to do is to be obedient. And what we've found, Patricia, is that when you're trying to make those decisions and you're feeling called or you have an opportunity, for us, we have looked to the word, we've asked other counselors, we've prayed, we've sought the Lord. And then once you make that decision, it's like a peace just settles over you and okay, this is where I'm supposed to be. And so even amidst the turmoil, at the top of our government, we felt peace. And everywhere we go, even now, people will grab our hand and say, I'm praying for you. And we know they really mean it. And they'll say, no, I mean, I prayed for you every day of the administration. And when you have so many people giving you that undergirding of prayer support, it really does help us to accomplish what God needed us to do.
Absolutely. I always say, follow the peace, right? And that's exactly right. And you talk in your book, throughout the book, you write about how God, you knew that God was calling you to different things. I mean, you talk about your marriage, your career, even as a teacher, and different things. So, what are you talked about you praying and asking people to pray, and then you finding that peace. Talk to someone out there who is struggling to make that decision, even though they know what God wants them to do. What are some of the things that made you take those steps, even with trembling knees, towards the direction that God was pointing you?
Well, I don't want to minimize that, for your listeners, that there is always anxiety that comes with it. If we think, oh, okay, I'm going to be a Christ follower now, things are going to go so smoothly. And that just isn't the way that it works. And so there is anxiety. So if you're feeling anxiety because you're making a tough decision, or you feel called, but you just don't think you can follow through, that's actually very normal. And I do tell stories in the book where others were encouraging me to serve, and it sounded like a great thing. A Bible study teacher wanted me to lead a small group, and it sounded great. And she just knew that was my calling. And Mike and I prayed about it. I prayed about it, and I said, uh, that is not my calling right now. I do not want to do that. Even though it's a very worthy cause, I told her my kids at that time were 2, 3, and 4, and I said, "My ministry is Michael, Charlotte, and Audrey." But I do encourage the reader that if you do think you're called to something, to not be afraid to take that risk. One of the verses that was one that we really loved in the very first campaign was in Jonah 2:8. Those that cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. We were newly married. We had our little bungalow house, and we didn't want to give up that little house. And it was tough to jump into the very first congressional race, which was 1988. And I think back, what if we hadn't let go of that worthless idol of that home? I wouldn't have had all of these experiences that I talk about in the book. And so it's worth it if you feel like God is calling you. That's why the subtitle of the book is Experiencing God's Grace in His Calling for Your Life. He will give you that grace.
Wow, Mrs. Grace, I could so relate to you because when I was called into ministry, as you can tell by my accent, I'm not from here. I'm from Brazil originally, and that was years ago when my accent was still stronger. It was stronger than it is right now, and it was such a difficult decision for me. I knew God had confirmed in His word that He wanted me to write and speak in America, in English, my second language. And it was exactly what you said. It's like I cling to that security of having just a job and being kind of in the background of things. But it was very hard to make that decision. But I knew that I knew I had confirmation. So when I stepped out in faith, I just saw and see still, 11 years later, just God's grace and open doors that I would never imagine that I would be talking to the former second lady of the United States. And who knows, maybe first lady again, never know. So, it's just incredible. You are right. God, He opens doors that only He opens. He doesn't want us to make that decision. He doesn't propels us to something without being there with us, right, and going ahead of us. So I love that. I love your insight on that. Now, for some people who may not have a very strong relationship with God, like you have yourself. Do you have some recommendations on how they can strengthen that relationship?
Well, for me, it I was I'd like to tell people I had a very strong faith from a young age. Probably about eighth grade, I just felt this deep, deep faith. And I just knew that the Lord was always with me. I could feel his presence very strongly. When I started dating Mike, and I tell this story in the book. Some of his friends were asking him, "Is she a Christian? Is she a Christian? Is she a Christian?" And I was very offended by that. I felt very judged, and I just didn't like them asking him that. And I asked him about it, and he said, "Well, what they're wondering is whether or not you've given your whole life to Christ, if you have just surrendered everything." And Mike likes to say, I don't give God each day. I give God my life each day. And that actually was a new concept to me. I had never heard of surrendering everything to him. I had been raised that he's very busy. He's the God of the universe. Don't ask him, for no rain on your picnic.
Mm,
That's not something you bring to God. When really, he wants every part of us. He wants
absolutely.
that intimate relationship with us. And so when I knew that, that really helped my faith grow even deeper. One of the things Mike and I have started doing, which you would think that we had done this many years ago, we've been married 38 years, but when we had to make this decision of whether or not to get into the presidential race, we decided to start reading our Bible together every single morning and praying together. We both had done it on our own separately, but we decided to do it together. And we got one of those Bibles that's, it's the read through the Bible in a year. And so
Mhm.
each day has your readings for the day. And by the end of the year, you've read the entire Bible. And it was amazing to us, Patricia, how much God spoke to us in those verses, and how fun it was for us to say, well, what did you get out of that reading? Well, what did you get? Well, why do you think that God says this? And we write notes in our Bible, and we could say, oh, you know what, in 2005 I wrote down this in the Bible. And for us, it really made reading the Bible come alive. So I would say that that's a suggestion. That's a good place to start if you're a new believer.
Absolutely. Yes. So I just told my husband this morning that my favorite name for the Bible is the Living Word, because
Yeah.
there isn't a truer name, right? Because it's incredible how it meets you, even if you do something like what you and Mr. Pence did, was to just read through the Bible. It's incredible how God meets you on that day with a word for you.
Yes.
And it's wonderful that you did that right while you're making the decision whether to run for the presidency. And I mean, I know that God spoke to you very clearly. And well, one thing that people may be very surprised. We're going to talk a little bit about Mrs. Pence, the mother, the grandmother, right? You have how many grandchildren?
Three granddaughters.
Oh my gosh. I have two daughters. I love girls. And now I'm hoping for boys because I don't have grandsons because I have no experience. But you talk about something very interesting about you that's very unique. You are a beekeeper, not just a beekeeper. You're an avid beekeeper. Can you tell us how you got into that? That's incredible.
Yes, it is a great little story. It's kind of a sub story of the entire book.
Yes.
But when I was First Lady of Indiana, I learned from another First Lady that she had started bees in her home state. And she said it's a great thing to do at the governor's residence because the honey that you harvest, you can put them in the little tiny honey or honey bear bottles and they don't spoil. honey doesn't spoil, so you don't have to worry about preserving it and making sure no one gets sick if they eat it. And so it seemed like a great thing to me. The governor's residence in Indiana is on 6 acres, so we had plenty of room to start a hive. So we actually had beekeepers in Indiana set it up, and they actually would run it. And I didn't really know a lot about bees then, and so they kind of took care of it. Then, when I became second lady, one of the first things I asked when I got there was, do we have a beehive? And that is 17 acres. And so I thought we need to have a beehive here. There's one at the White House, so we should have one at the Vice President's house. And so we started a beehive there as well. And the wonderful thing was that as we traveled the world on other initiatives or with the Vice President, we would take a little side trip and we would go visit bees in whatever country or whatever state in the United States that we were visiting. And it was so interesting to hear from beekeepers all around the world how they handle their hives. The other interesting thing that we started seeing was that beekeeping is something that we can use with our veterans who come back from combat with post-traumatic stress disorder. There is something about taking care of the bees that is therapeutic for them. And it makes them feel like, once again, they are part of a team and they are taking care of the bees. And it's been very, very successful. And so I decided when I wrote the book that I wanted each chapter to start with a little bee fact so that I could share some of the things I've learned about bees. And so the bee fact actually goes along with whatever that chapter is about. But God has shown me through learning more about the bees that if He can give this little honeybee everything that it needs to fulfill its purpose in its little 6 to 8 week lifespan, surely He can do the same for me.
Absolutely. What a beautiful metaphor that you use throughout the book, about the bees and how the lessons that you have learned really from just taking care of them. So I have to ask, do your children and grandchildren get in there with you?
Well, actually, I don't have a beehive of my own right now.
Oh
I'm no, I have one in the basement that I have not set up yet
no.
because they really do require care, and we are traveling extensively right now.
Oh.
And so when we travel, we have pet sitters come and take care of the dog and cat, but I didn't think it would be fair to ask them to take care of the bees as well. But I have my beehive all ready to go. Yeah, I'm
Oh,
ready.
oh, how amazing. I know that I'm sure that you miss, the being right there and taking care of them. So I hope that you can set up very, very soon your beehive. Wow, that's wonderful. Now, you call yourself a fish out of water. And I believe I imagine what can you elaborate on that?
I'm it's interesting when Mike and I were dating, he made it very clear that he wanted to run for Congress sometime in his life. And I knew that was on the horizon. But it came, and I tell the whole story in the book, it came more quickly than we thought it was going to come. And so all of a sudden, we were kind of thrust into this political life. We learned a lot. I talk about how we lost the first two campaigns and gave up on that dream, and I talk about how the dream came back again, and again we had to make a very difficult decision on whether or not to run again. But I do not consider myself political. And one of the things I learned when Mike first started running was that at campaign events, I don't really have to know what the policy is or what another strategy might be or what bills should be passed. I learned that people who come to political events are just people who care. They're people who care about their community and their state and their country. And all I had to do was listen and take their ideas back to Mike. And so while I don't want to run for office and I wouldn't want to be in his shoes at all, that's kind of what I mean by not by being a fish out of water. That's really not what I'm comfortable doing. And I'm not really into a lot of, big glamorous events, but I do love campaigning with people.
That's great. Well, and right on the subject, inside the subject of the book, where your subtitle says "Experiencing God's Grace in His Calling for Your Life," um, you you just mentioned that you would listen to people and then bring to Mr. Pence the things that you were hearing and everything. But you also used your personal calling to help others while the second lady of the United States. And I know you've done that in Indiana's first lady as well. And you, first of all, you remained an art teacher, right? And which
Uh,
I was like, how on earth
I
did
know,
you do that? You were teaching at a Christian school in Virginia, right?
right?
Tell me, why did you decide to continue teaching?
Well, it's interesting. You said we had a lot of initiatives and things we wanted to do. And one of the things I say in the book to the reader is, when you're put in a position of leadership, it does give you opportunities that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise. And I found that suddenly people would take my phone call and they would come to events that I would invite them to. And so we did use that to kind of further some of the initiatives and things that were near and dear to my heart. But I had taught at this little Christian school where our kids went when Mike was in Congress, and I had taught art there 12 years. When I was second lady, I got a call from the school, and they said, you know, this is probably crazy, but our art teacher just had to leave suddenly and become a pastor. And so, would you be willing to even just fill in? Well, the advantage of this school is that I wrote the curriculum, I know all the lessons, and it's only a 2-day a week job. In the office of the second lady, we have a very small staff. So if we were planning things we were going to do during the week, it really did take my staff a couple of days to get things done. So if I was going to go speak at a convention, they had to go do the walkthrough, security had to go, they had to prepare my remarks, all of those types of things. So there was a lot of downtime for me while they were setting things up. So I thought, what if I taught Monday and Tuesday? They could get everything ready for the week. And I told the school, if something else comes up that's more important, my priority is being second lady. And so if something comes up or I need to travel or be at an event, I can't be there. And I told them I can't do back to school nights, I can't do parent conferences, but if you want me just to teach art, I can do that. And so that's what I did. And it really, honestly, Patricia, it kept me grounded. And this is a community that I had been close to for 12 years before we went back to Indiana when Mike was governor. And so these are men and women who could hold me accountable and keep me grounded. And okay, you're the second lady of the United States, but here you're just Mrs. Pence, the art teacher.
Mm.
And it was really good for me.
Absolutely. It's always important to stay grounded like that as a
Right.
believer, of course, stay humble and grounded. That's wonderful. Well, I know that also art, you used your love for art and your knowledge of art to actually create a very important initiative. While second lady, you launched an art therapy initiative, healing with the heart, and you play with the word heart and use the ART for art there. Why did you choose this cause, and why was it so important for you as a second lady to focus on that? And actually, tell us a little bit about who this initiative was intended to. Tell us more about it.
Well, it's something that a lot of people don't know much about. When I was teaching art when Mike was in Congress, I actually heard from a lobbyist for Disney about this program at Tracy's Kids, which is a program for children with cancer in Washington, D.C. And each child going through cancer treatment is partnered up with an art therapist. And I didn't know what it was either. Well, what's an art therapist? And they clarified it for me that it's not like what I do if I sit down and paint my watercolors by myself, or if I teach art to my students. An art therapist is actually a therapist. They are master's and doctorate level trained. So they are people who understand therapy and someone who is going through trauma, but they use art as their medium to kind of get the conversation started. And so I started observing and eventually went onto the board of Tracy's Kids. When I became First Lady of Indiana, I helped start art therapy at Riley Children's Hospital in Indianapolis. And I felt like when I became second lady, it would be an opportunity to tell the world about art therapy. And so we started visiting art therapists all over the world. And we had certain things we wanted to do. We wanted to make people aware of art therapy if you're someone who's experiencing trauma. We also wanted young people to know about art therapy if it was something that they wanted to go into. And we also wanted to encourage colleges and universities to have courses to train art therapists. Because what we found is the brain is malleable, and there is something about art that helps the side of the brain that's injured in trauma. That's the verbal side. And so we would have these vets come back from combat, and they would not know why they couldn't talk to their wife, and they couldn't talk to a therapist, and they were having nightmares, but they didn't know how to deal with it. And we found that starting to work with art, sometimes clay or drawing or painting, they would suddenly say, "Oh, this thing I just created, that's my nightmare." Or the art therapist has all different ways to draw this out of them, but so many of them said to me, "Mrs. Pence, art therapy saved my life."
Wow. Wow, that's
Mhm.
incredible. So do these initiatives, I really don't, that's my ignorance on this question. I don't know. Do these type of initiatives continue after you leave the government or?
Well, yes, good question. So really my initiative was just making people aware.
Mhm.
And so we just did that by doing events really all over the world. We would go
Mhm.
somewhere and we would maybe observe an art therapist, or we would have an art therapist do a presentation in their country, and just make people aware of it through our social media. And so now the initiatives that I actually started, they just kind of carry on their own what they were doing before. One of my initiatives was helping military spouses with employment, because our military spouses move constantly with the military member. And let's say you're a dentist or a hairdresser, some profession that requires a license. All of a sudden, there goes your business.
Mhm.
You're moving to a new state. And so many states at that time, and some still do, require continuing education and paying for your license. And they don't let you do that till you actually move there. And it was a big struggle for these military spouses. So, in that sense, what we tried to do was we tried to work with states and governors and Congress to pass laws that would allow these military spouses licenses to be reciprocal over state lines. And many states actually did do that. So that is something that the benefits did carry on.
Oh, that's so amazing. I love that. Well, can we have a little fun?
Sure, I think so.
I I read that you turned up to Pet Night on Capitol Hill with a lizard, two cats, and a dog.
Yeah.
And then you found out that you were in the right place. You were at the right place, but not quite equipped for the evening, right? So tell us a little bit about that funny story.
Yes. One of the things I try to point out in the book is, we tried to be a part of Washington. And when we first moved here, yes, they had pet night on Capitol Hill. And we thought, great, we're pet people. We can do this. So our kids were so excited. Michael brought his lizard. The girls each had their cats. We put them on a leash, and then we had our dog. And we show up, and I think the people who had organized it were like, who are these people? Because we walked in and there were no pets there. This was just an event for companies that provide, pet products. But they did have like a celebrity pet, maybe they had the dog from Men in Black or that kind of thing. So
Yes.
they had a special pet that people could get their pictures with. And here we were with these two cats, a lizard and a dog. But it was an opportunity once again for us to be humbled and kind of learn the ropes of Washington.
Absolutely. That's such a fun story. And there are other fun stories, just like as you said, you were just the real person, real deal. A person who has struggles like anybody else has, sometimes is embarrassed by different situations. I mean, this happens to everyone who's breathing. And I love that. Well, this is an incredible book, Mrs. Pence. I thank you for writing. Thank you for giving us a little insight into, into your life as a mother, a wife, a teacher, and also as the important role that you have played as First Lady of India and Second Lady of the United States. I know that you are super busy now with uh, former Vice President Pence running for the White House, not for the White House, but for the nomination. And our prayers are with you. I know
Thank you.
that this is a very stressful time, but I love that you are here launching a book when it's your turn to serve at a time where who knows, you may be having to step again into very big shoes. Talk to someone out there as we finish this our wonderful conversation. Talk to someone out there who is struggling to make that decision to step into the unknown with God.
Well, it is a little intimidating. We have a story I tell in the book about when we had to decide whether or not to run for Congress one more time. We had kids now. We had just built our dream house. We both had our own businesses going, and it just didn't seem like God could possibly be calling us to run one more time. And I had given Mike a trip to a dude ranch in Colorado as his 40th birthday present. And we were riding horses up to the top of a bluff in the Teddy Roosevelt National Forest. We got off our horses and sat on the side of the ledge. And Mike said, we have to make a decision whether or not we're going to step into this congressional race. And we had been talking about it all week, praying, reading the Bible, really struggling with this. It was very different from when we ran before we had kids and we, didn't have a dream house then. And there was so much we would have to sacrifice to run for Congress this time. And we were sitting on the edge. We got off the horses. We're sitting on the edge of the bluff. And right then, two red-tailed hawks just started rising on the wind. And they were just rising like this. They were not flapping their wings, but they were just being lifted up. And Mike said, those two red-tailed hawks are like us. And I said, well, you know what? If those two hawks are like us, then I think we should run. But this time, instead of ambition driving us like it had when we were much younger, instead of ambition and our own desire driving us, I think we should run again, but this time we should run like the hawks. We should step off of this cliff and make ourselves available. And if God wants to lift us up, then we will serve wherever he lifts us up to. And right then, we made the decision to run, and no flapping has been our mantra ever since.
Oh, I love that. You know, my ministry, the name of my ministry is Soaring with Him, you
I
know,
know.
and
I
that's
love that.
yeah, Soaring with Him. And, you know, it's based on the Isaiah 40:31 verse. And it's
Mhm.
just the fact that God is the wind beneath our wings,
That's
our
exactly
wings,
right.
right? I mean, when you are following Him and you are living, you know, with Him, close to Him, you don't have to flap your wings. I love
Right.
that. We have that in common. I try to soar as much as I love that. Well, this is a wonderful, wonderful interview. I really enjoyed talking to you. I look forward to writing a column for the Atlanta Journal about your book, and that our prayers are with you. And y'all, I have one more copy to give away to someone in my audience. Just share this interview on social media and tag me, and you will enter your name for a drawing of the book, Mrs. Pence's book. So I'm looking forward to share all this information about you. Thank you so much for taking your time from your very busy schedule to talk to me.
Thank you, Patricia.
God bless you.
God bless you.